everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Our creative design team has a Love Your Stash bonus for you during the month of July. A couple of us are creating some projects using items from our craft stash. Now, this challenge started back in February. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in the video, and I'm going to share with you how you can join in on the challenge. Today, I have grabbed some papers from my stash. A lot of these are from older collections. I believe one is called Jubilee, the other is called Dakota, and I'm going to be using them to create a scrapbook layout of 2 farm field trips to the exact same farm that my son took in first grade. At the beginning of his first grade year, we started him in one school, and then at Christmas time, we transferred him to another. Well, in the fall, the first school took him on a farm field trip, and then the end of the year field trip at the other school was to the same farm. So it was easier for me to just combine all of the photos that he took and the photos that his teacher took on one page, and then talk about the story, how he got to visit this farm twice. So as you can see, I've already added some pattern papers to my layout. I have this other sheet of pattern paper from the Jubilee collection, and it is such a busy pattern that I've decided instead of using it as is, I'm just going to cut it apart and use bits and pieces from this design. So I've started out by cutting this little border that has some tickets and this cute little blue chicken. It's going to match the blue frame that I've added around the class photo. And then I decided to cut out the little flags on that red checkered pattern paper. I have that flag that says hay rides, and I want to add some more flags at the top of the page. So instead of just creating flags, I decided to use my Cricut control knife, and I've cut out the little bottom portions of the flags. And then these are going to layer over the top of the photo. So now I'm going to start adhering all of these pattern papers down onto my piece of cardstock. This is a toffee colored cardstock. I thought it would go well with all of the other farm elements that are on the page. I'm being very careful not to add any adhesive behind those little flags I cut out, because you're going to see here that I end up lifting them up, and I place a little bit of foam tape underneath them so that they pop up over the top of that class photo. I also added some brown and white twine below the photo to match the other tan elements on the page. Now I'm going to cut out some more icons from that Jubilee background page. I'm going to be cutting out this little fun flag. I'm going to add it to the flags at the top because I want to cover up that purple flag. It really doesn't match any of the other elements on my page. And then I'm going to grab myself a drink of coffee here before I continue cutting out more of those little images. Like I said, this background sheet from the Jubilee collection is way too busy for me to use, but there are some adorable phrases and images that I want to use on my page. I'm going to be cutting out this little farm animals title, and I'm going to be using the blue stars border that you see there over on the right under the word summertime. This is going to make a nice addition to the page, and it also matches some of the other blue elements that I have added on my layout. I'm also going to cut out that phrase that says fresh eggs. That's going to be used on the second page of this layout. And I'm also cutting out that little rosette. Right now I've just cut it in the rectangle shape with the ticket behind it. Later on I'll end up fussy cutting it out. I'm also cutting out a blue polka dot flag that's on one of the other pieces of patterned paper. And I also ended up cutting out the word games. I don't show it on camera, but you will see that I use it on the layout. So now you're going to be able to see how I put all of these icons and images on the page. Most of the time, when I come across a scrapbooking piece of paper that has a lot of little images like this, I like to take it apart and use the pieces individually. You already saw how I use those tickets across the bottom as a border. Now I'm using that strip of stars as a border across the top. Now I'm going to lay down that polka dot flag I cut out above the star border. I'm also going to be adding that farm animals title that I cut out. Later on, I realized that I really don't like the way it looks, and I end up changing out the title. I realized that I needed something a little bit larger in this open space. So I'm cutting out that little cow image that was on the icon sheet, and I've decided that I want to add some texture behind that cow image. So I've grabbed a hexagon stencil from my stencil pack, and I'm going to be adding some little inked images behind it. Right now I'm using a little bit of Post-it tape to mask off the items I've already stuck down so I don't get ink on my photos or paper. Now I chose the hexagon image because there are some chicken wire images behind some of the other elements on the page, and the hexagon looks a lot like that chicken wire. I'm just using a sponge and some espresso ink, and I'm just blotting the ink all over that side of the page, not really filling in all of the hexagons and just kind of fading it out as I go. I do check it as I'm working with this stencil just to make sure that I have enough ink down onto the page. After going over it a few times, I'm able to remove the stencil, and you can see that wonderfully faded background. I'm going to go ahead and remove that Post-it tape masking, and then I can adhere down that polka dot flag I cut out and that little cow image. That hexagon stenciling really helps this part of the page stand out, and it's going to be the perfect place for my main title. Off camera, I added some zigzag stitching on the border at the bottom using some brown thread. I also added a couple of haphazard stitches across the flag at the top to match that brown twine that I added below the photo. Now I'm going to start to build that area that's going to have my title. So I have that little rosette that I cut out, and I have the word games because the kids played a lot of different games. I have photos of those games on the other page. I'm going to be using some alphabet brads here to create the title. These are a bright red color. They're going to match all of the other red elements on the page, and I'm going to spell the word farm. I'm going to be using my piercer tool to help me get these brads onto the page. I have a little foam piece underneath my layout, and I'm just poking that piercer tool through all of the layers of paper and cardstock, and this is going to help me get each one of those brads in place. On some of these brads, I also end up using the wooden edge of that piercer tool to help me fold over a few of those brad ends. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of extra brads in my stash. For the longest time, this was something that we all had to have a lot of, and we had to have them in every single color. So it has been a goal of mine with each of these Love Your Stash challenges to try to use up a few of the brads and eyelets that I have in my collection. All right, so now that I've added that nice bold title onto the page, I'm going to adhere the word games below it using a little bit of foam tape. That word games helps to form a nice visual triangle between the green flag at the top and that hayride flag at the bottom. Originally, I wanted to place that little rosette on the right side, but I realized that it balanced out the page much better over there on the left. To add a little bit more texture to this design, I'm going to create a little decorative knot on that brown twine. I'm going to move it over next to the word games, and then I'm just going to fray it up just a little bit, and we're going to move on to the second page of this layout. On the second page, I'm going to be using the same papers that I used on the first one. I'm going to be placing that red plaid paper along the right side of the page, and then I have cut a piece of that blue striped paper. It's going to be tucked under that strip of red over there on the left side of the page. Before I do that, I do want to add a little bit more of that chicken wire background. So I've gone ahead and grabbed my espresso ink and my stencil once again, and I'm going to add some inking in the top and lower corners of the page. So as you can see, I've already added that blue striped piece of paper. Now I'm going to adhere down all of these animal photos that my son took and photos of the kids playing games. When our kids were younger and they went on a field trip, we would send them with a disposable camera. Now, some of you may have no idea what this is. It is a little plastic camera with a roll of film inside. And our children would take this camera with them. They would snap pictures of all their favorite things on the field trip. And then we would take it into a developer and have the roll of film developed. Now, recently I came across a box of about 10 of these disposable cameras. So I'm trying to decide if it is worth developing the film, because we discovered that it's going to be about $20 to $35 per camera to have them developed. So I would love to have your opinions on this, whether it's worth trying to discover any treasures on these cameras or if I should just toss them in the trash. So I added that little Fresh Eggs logo across the bottom of the page, and I've cut out some more flags. I also cut out this little journaling card. I end up removing it from the page because it's just too big for this design. I also added a little rosette on top of those flags to match other elements. I added some stitching to replicate the stitching on the other page, and I added a nice little red zip strip below the Fresh Eggs just to kind of ground that a little bit. I also found this adorable red pig die cut, and of course I had to add him onto the page. I completed most of this layout while I was at a retreat. While I was putting together the layout, you probably thought it looked a little bit backwards. Sometimes when I'm creating, I end up placing the layout in the incorrect places while I'm designing, and then I end up always flipping the pages to the other side. Maybe some of you can give me some insight to why I do this, or if you preferred it the original way I created it. All right, so once I got home, I ended up typing up my journaling strips on some French vanilla paper, trimmed it down to about 1/4 inch strips, and then I adhered it down on that right page. This story just talks about how our son got to visit the farm twice in first grade, once in the fall and once in the spring after we moved. So now I have another layout complete from the past using a lot of papers from the past. Remember, these are retired collections. I honestly wish they would bring this Jubilee collection back because I loved using it so much. On this layout, I did add some stenciling around the edges and around the title. It matches all the other elements on the page. I added some different flags, some stitching. I cut out all sorts of icons from that Jubilee paper. And then I was also able to find a couple of little die cuts that I had in my stash. After all, our goal is to start using up our stash. Now, I was showing you how the layout was placed down while I was making these pages. This is how I plan on placing them in my album. I honestly would love to know why I always create my layouts backwards. It always balances out, it always works out, but it's just the way my creative brain works. I hope today's Love Your Stash project inspired you to bring out a few of your old papers and start creating something new. We started this Love Your Stash challenge back in the month of February. We would love for you to continue using up your stash through the rest of the year. All you have to do is use that hashtag whenever you post something on Instagram. After all, it is always a great sense of accomplishment to use up some of those crafting items in your stash. If you would like to see any of our Love Your Stash creations from the past, you can go ahead and click on that playlist above. While you're at it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future videos. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.